If you get a fertiliser plan done, you're not only complying with all the rules, but the important thing is you're going to combat and improve the optimal soil fertility on your farm. And sometimes we forget that the rules are there and we have to comply with them. But the important thing about fertiliser plan is, where do I need lime? Spread the lime, spread it at the right amount. What type of fertiliser I should be buying.
Hello and welcome to the Beef Edge, the Teagasc Beef Podcast, for all your latest news, information and advice for Irish beef farmers. I'm Catherine Egan, and on this week's episode, as thoughts on farms move to fertiliser application, I'm joined by Teagasc specialist Tim Hyde in this two-part podcast to discuss the rules and regulations surrounding nitrates. Tim, you're very welcome. Can you remind listeners of the open period for chemical fertiliser, farmyard manure and slurry across the different zones?
There's 3 different zones that apply to chemical fertiliser, farmyard manure and slurry spreading. Zone A, which is kind of where people need 16-week slurry storage, they can start spreading chemical fertiliser on the 27th of January, and the FYM and slurry have started in those zones since the 13th of January. If you're in Zone B, which is kind of Kerry, Limerick, Galway, Roscommon, Meath, those kind of areas, and you need 18-week slurry storage, the 29th of January applies for spreading chemical fertiliser, and they have started spreading FYM and slurry since the 16th of January. And then when you get up to Cavan, Monaghan, Leitrim and Donegal, they can't spread chemical fertiliser until the 15th of February, and the slurry and farmyard manure can start on the 1st of February. So the important thing is to find out what zone you're in and make sure that you check with your agricultural advisor when you can start spreading your fertiliser or your slurry or FYM.
When it comes to roadways on farms, what do farmers need to be aware of?
It's a good question, Catherine, because it's something that has maybe gone under the radar of most farmers. Since 2020, there's a new rule there that every farmer that has a farm roadway, whether it's a roadway for livestock or a roadway for machinery, or any farmer that has a roadway, gravel type of roadway on their farm, it cannot be sloped towards what we call waters. And waters is defined as a stream, a drain, a river, or even a dry drain that can carry water. Some people call them dikes and ditches and drains, whatever you want to call it, but anything that can convey water, your farm roadway cannot slope towards it. There's also supposed to be livestock. It's supposed to be cambered away or sloped away from those water features, if you want to call it. And if it's a far roadway for walking livestock along, it's supposed to be fenced so livestock can't get from the roadway towards the drain. So, dairy farmers would have been the ones impacted by this more, because, they're inclined to get more inspections because they're higher stocked. But this one applies to every farmer. And, not every farmer may be able to slope a roadway away from these water features, but at least you need to be able to put in something like a mound of clay or something along it to stop anything that's falling on the road, whether it be rainfall or urine from the livestock getting into this drain.
That's important, Tim, for farmers to realise it's for every farmer. Every year questions arise around the requirements for round bale storage. What do farmers need to be aware of?
Yeah, and look, it's a great time of year to ask that question, because as silage stocks are used up, at least you'll be starting with a fresh stock of silage bales for the year as we get into the silage season later on in April, May and June. The requirement is that you cannot, if you have silage bales stored on a concrete base, and you have effluent channels around that to collect any effluent that might escape, and that effluent channel is going into a tank, you can stack bales more than 2 high. If you don't have an effluent, if it's not on a concrete base and there isn't the effluent channel and there isn't the storage tank, you cannot stack bales, round bales, whether they be silage bales or haylage bales, you cannot stack them more than 2 high. So if you drive along the road and you're looking at silage bales stacked in fields or stacked on gravel, they cannot be stacked more than 2 high, because there's no way of collecting any effluent that might escape. And it's important to note as well that there is an additional requirement there that if they're stacked on gravel or there's no effluent channels or they're stacked in the field, they have to be more than 20 metres away from what we called earlier waters, so drains, dikes, rivers, streams.
And that's really important to note, as you say, Tim. It's time now to making decisions for when silage bales are being made in the summer.
Well, it's time now to be thinking about, well, where am I going to store my silage bales? I'm going to step out 20 metres from the nearest drain, at least, maybe go 25 to be on the safe side. And do I have a concrete base? Do I have effluent channels? Do I have a tank? If I do, I can stack them more than too high. If I don't, I have to stay to too high.
Moving on, Tim, a lot of farmers are questioning in relation to buffer zones. What are the buffer zones when it comes to applying chemical fertiliser?
Well, that one is simple enough. It's 3 metres. Whether you're planting, whether it's a grass crop or an arable crop, tillage crop, it's 3 metres from any drain. So any water feature. And I'll keep going back to mentioning water features. It's not just a flowing stream, it's not a flowing river. Anything that can convey water, so a ditch, a dike, a drain, stream, river, 3 metres.
And in relation to stocking rate, it's coming up again. What does the stocking rate mean for grassland versus whole farm, and what rules apply?
Yeah, that's a really good question because all the rules that are in the Nitrates directive about what farmers have to do or what the requirements are on them if there's a department inspection, or we'll be coming maybe to talk about low emission slurry spreading and things like that. All those rules are based on what's called the grassland stocking rate. So the grassland stocking rate will vary if you have one farm that's all grass or a farm that's 50% grass and 50% tillage. You could say you have a farm that's 100% grass. Well, then the grassland stocking rate is the total nitrogen produced from the holding from grazing livestock, so sheep, cattle, horses, deer, whatever, divided by the grassland reference area on their BIS application. If the same farm had 50% of the farm in grass and 50% in tillage, then the stocking rate will be doubled because the total amount of nitrogen is still the same from the grazing livestock, but the grassland area is halved. So when we talk about what requirements are on certain farmers for certain rules and regulations within the Nitrates directive, it's all based on the grassland stocking rate. So if a farmer was able to use ag food and get into the nitrogen and phosphorus statements there, they'll be able to see now there's a section here that says your grassland hectares and your GSR, which is your grassland stocking rate, or ask your advisor if you can't get that information, and the advisor will tell you, well, this is your grassland stocking rate. Now that grassland nitrogen and phosphorus statement is only for bovine animals production of N for the year. You will have to work out what the sheep contribute on top of that, any horses, what they contribute. So a lowland ewe is 13 kilos per hectare, and there's different figures then for lowland hoggets, hill sheep and hill hoggets. So it's important to get a basis of where you are with your bovines, add on your sheep and horses onto it, and come up with a total figure. Say, well, this is my grassland stocking rate, so what rules apply to me? And once you have that, then you can decide, well, I need to use low emissions, or I'm supposed to have a liming plan or whatever.
And this is the key way, really, Tim, to find out if a farmer is stocked at, you often get the question, am I stocked at 85 or 100 or 130 kilos? This is how they find out what the figure for their farm is.
Yeah, and so it's grassland stocking rate. You need to find out what the grassland stocking rate was in the previous year. So we're now in 2025. So the rules that apply to you in 2025 are based on your grassland stocking rate in 2024. Once you have that, then you can make decisions about what you need to do.
And new rules come in, Tim, with regard to notifying the department for slurry movements. What do farmers need to be aware of?
Okay, this one is there's going to be a bedding in period in this, and for us all to get used to it, not just for farmers but for advisors. For the farmer who's exporting slurry, any slurry that they export, or FYM that they export, or anybody who's exporting from a piggery or a poultry unit, those movements are supposed to be created on the ag food system within 4 days of them being moved. The Department of Agriculture have also launched an app which can be downloaded, and look, you can talk to your Teagasc advisor or your consultant about it. Get that app, and you can create a movement to say that I, Farmer A, moved 40,000 gallons of cattle slurry to Farmer B, and we put in both herd numbers, and it kind of says, yes, that's you can submit that, and then Farmer B would get a text message to say, this slurry has moved to you. Are you happy with it? You need to go into Ag Food, and they can use the app as well to accept it or verify it, or they can go into Ag Food on the web application through your computer to do it. The 4-day rule means that it has to be created, the movement has to be submitted by the exporter within 4 days of it happening. The importer, depending on the time of year, but normally at the moment what we know is from now until the 1st of June, they have until a couple of weeks later to verify that movement actually happened. Exporters that create a movement after the middle of the year have until early January 26 to verify that that movement has actually taken place. Users in their Ag Food profile or in the app will be able to see what has moved. Has it been verified? So as an exporter and an importer, you'll be able to see what has been exported from Farmer A's holding, and Farmer B will be able to see, well, this moved on to my holding and I have verified it, and vice versa for the farmer who initially moved it. It's going to take a bit of getting used to. There is some linkage between inspections and these movements that happen within 4 days. Various parties on the Department Inspectorate side of it and local authority inspectorate side will be able to view to say that Farmer A moves slurry to Farmer B. They can go out and inspect Farmer B and say, look, did you actually get this slurry? Can I see where this field where it was spread, etc. So it's going to create a bit of getting used to, but like everything, it'll become part of the norm after a while for us all.
Most definitely, Tim. Changes to soil sampling requirements came into effect in 2023. Can you just remind farmers what they were?
Yeah, I suppose, look, and this kind of leads us on to maybe something we'll discuss in a few minutes, which is the National Fertiliser Database, where everything's recorded now. All the fertilisers that you buy are recorded. In 2023, new rules came in that if you're, and we'll go back to the calculation of your stocking rate, your grassland stocking rate. So at the start of 2023, farmers that didn't have soil samples that had a previous year's GSR of over 130 grassland stocking rate, if they didn't have soil samples, they weren't allowed to buy any chemical P or import any organic manures on the grassland land affected. For tillage farmers, regardless of their stocking rate, if they've no soil sample, they are also caught with the same rules. They cannot buy chemical fertilizer with P in it, compounds. They can't import organic manures. And this has driven the increase in soil sampling across the entire country. Like, its soil sample numbers are well up since these rules came in, because farmers want to be able to import organic manures or they want to be able to buy compounds. But if you fall into those two categories with a grassland stocking rate over 130, or any arable land, any tillage land you may have in your holding, regardless of your stocking rate, you need soil samples to say, well, these results are showing that I'm P index 1, 2, or 3, and I have a certain allowance depending on my stocking rate. But without the soil samples to prove that, I'm not allowed any compounds or importing organic manure. So it's very important that the farmers, when they find out what stocking rate they're at, their grassland stocking rate, do I fall over 130, or if I have arable land, tillage lands, then I need to make a decision. I need to take soil samples, and soil samples only last for 4 years, and they need to be repeated, because then if they go run out of date, well, then I'm back to being not allowed any chemical P. Mark may talk a little bit about soil fertility, or Mark Plunkett, and the thing is that we don't want people not to put out compounds where they're needed, or not to use organic manures, because they're, from a cost efficiency point of view, organic manures are the way to go. But what's happening is farmers are a little bit afraid to buy because of the rules, and therefore the soil fertility is dropping. So, my advice here is find out your grassland stocking rate, talk to your advisor, take soil samples, and make a plan for going forward.
And in relation to the P build-up, Tim, What extra allowances are there for P for farms stocked over the 130 organic nitrogen that you mentioned?
Because we're not talking about building soil fertility and having confidence to do so and stay within the rules, there is an allowance there for farmers with a GSR, grassland stocking rate over 130, to apply to the department to say, well, I have low soil fertility, my P index 1 and 2 soils, so very low and low. We want to try and build them up to index 3, ideally. But to do so can take time. But this P buildup, as we call it, you apply to the department, say, I want to apply for P buildup. It gives you an extra 30 kgs of P, which is the equivalent of 24 units per acre at P index 1, on top of what you're allowed already. And at P index 2, it gives you an extra 20 kgs per hectare, which is 16 units per acre, to those soils. Now, there's a requirement that if for derogation farmers, they will already have done the training courses. So that's that box ticked. They submit a nutrient management plan. They have all the farm sampled. They need full slurry storage, etc. But for those farmers who are not in derogation between the 130 and 170, they need to apply through their advisor to DAFM there's an email address there, and they need to do the same thing. Soil sample the whole farm, do a fertilizer plan, have soil analysis results, provide a soil sampling map of where the soil samples were taken, and send all that stuff into an email address within the department, and then you're okay for P buildup for 4 years until the low soil samples run out of days, and then you resample again after 4 years.
In relation to the low emission slurry spreading for farmers, what are the rules with regard to farmers that are stocked over the 130 kilos of organic nitrogen per hectare and now over 100 kilos?
So again, good question, because it's changed. The rule has moved to a different phase from the 1st of January 2025 for low emissions. Any farmer who has a grassland stocking rate, we've talked about that several times already, over 100 from the 1st of January 2025 has to use low emissions equipment for all the slurry that they are spreading on their holding. And as I said to you, the DAFM nitrogen and phosphorus statements in ag food will show you your bovine stocking rate. You then have to add your sheep and horses to it as well. And for people listening to this podcast, if you're on a mixed holding with cattle and sheep, you need to do that calculation manually. If you've cattle only, will give it to you automatically, the nitrogen phosphorus statement. But they have to use low emissions for all the slurry on the holding. And we've come across in some instances where a farmer has spread 90% of the slurry with low emissions, and there's a little bit left in the tank, and they use their own tanker with a splash plate, and that can lead to problems if there's an inspection.
So it's really important, Tim, that farmers are aware that for non-derogation farmers that are stocked over 170 kilos of organic nitrogen but are exporting slurry to remain compliant, what are the additional rules that are applicable now to those farms?
Yeah, that's a cohort of farmers that sometimes think, well, I'm not in derogation because I'm exporting slurry. Then a lot of the rules don't apply to me. So for them, well, first of all, if they're over the 130, okay, because they're over 170, they can't put out any chemical P or import or any organic manures, obviously, because they're over 170. But they could use chemical P if they have soil samples to prove that they can take it in. So they need a nutrient management plan. They're also supposed to have a liming plan, which means they have to have the whole farm soil sampled and have a liming plan for the farm, and that should increase the efficiency of fertilizers, or the nutrient use efficiency of fertilizers used. We mentioned earlier on about the farm roadways. Applies to every farmer, so that applies to them as well. They're also supposed to have all water courses fenced 1.5 meters back from bovines when bovines are in the field. Now, how do you define what's a water course? Because I mentioned earlier about waters. Well, if you talk to your advisor, you will be able to get a map that will show blue lines on it that are defined water courses, and they have to be fenced whenever bovines are within the field. Water troughs are supposed to be 20 meters away from those blue lines as well. And there are crude protein rules as well that apply to them, that they shouldn't be feeding this year more than 14% crude protein to dairy cows. So there's some of the rules. I would say to you, there is literature out there that you can get off your consultant or off the Teagasc website about. There's a nitrates bulletin there we did as part of the environmental newsletters in 2024 that would say, depending on what stocking rate you're at, whether you're over 100 or 130 or 170 or in derogation, that newsletter will explain to the farmers what the rules they need to comply with.
And finally, Tim, can you comment on the importance of fertiliser planning now to know for the allowances for the fertiliser register and allow farmers to make more accurate nutrient management planning decisions for 2025?
Yeah, and it's a good one to finish on because it's really a hot topic at the moment. Farmers' fertiliser price is fluctuating, more upward than downward. Farmers want to know, well, what fertiliser can I buy, how much I can buy, what type of fertiliser I can buy. And you can only answer those questions when you have a fertiliser plan or a nutrient management plan done. So I mentioned already about the importance of having soil samples, and I would say a soil sample every 4 hectares for the entire farm. If you're in derogation, that's done automatically. If you're over 170, you're supposed to have a liming plan. If you're over 130, you can't use chemical P compounds unless you have soil samples to prove otherwise. So the fact that the National Fertiliser Database now records every bit of fertiliser that's moved from co-ops or merchants to a farmer, or if farmers buy from farmer to farmer, all that information is available to be looked up by an inspector to see, well, I'm going out to visit farmer A tomorrow. What fertiliser did they use last year? What have they used or what have they bought so far this year? If you get a fertiliser plan done, you're not only complying with all the rules, but the important thing is you're going to combat and improve the soil fertility, the optimal soil fertility on your farm. And sometimes we forget that the rules are there and we have to comply with them. But the important thing about fertiliser plan is, where do I need lime? Spread the lime, spread it at the right amount. What type of fertiliser I should be buying? Do I need compounds to build up soil fertility? We talked about P buildup. Do I need a little bit more compound P there? Can I import organic manures? And that, as part of a fertiliser plan and nutrient management plan, that will be looked at as well. If I only want to use X amount of chemical fertiliser, can I import organic manures or FIM or whatever from into the farm to save me money? So I would say to any of your listeners out there, have your soil samples taken within the last 4 years? Have you a fertiliser plan? Have you an up-to-date fertiliser plan for 2025? Do you know what fertiliser you can buy? Do you know what you can import in the form of organic fertiliser if you want to do that? And have you taken into account any closing stocks of fertiliser that you submitted on the National Fertiliser Database last year? And that will give confidence to the farmer, to the advisor, and also to the merchant who's selling the fertiliser, that farmer A has all the building blocks of a nutrient management plan and knows that when the farmer A comes in and he says, I want 10 tonne of 18612, 4 tonne of protected urea and 2 tonne of muriate of potash, that everybody is going to tick the box and that no one is going to be afraid to say, well, I've gone over my limits.
That's great, Tim, because that is a key thing. There is no transaction limit on the National Fertiliser base, so there's no way for the merchant or co-op to know you're at your limit or you're gone above it or you're still below it and you can buy more. It's really down to the farmer completing the nutrient management plan with their advisor to know what the limits are.
Yeah, 100% correct. And that's what I'm saying about giving confidence. If a farmer gets a fertiliser plan done by a consultant or a Teagasc advisor, they can be confident in going to the co-op to buy X amount of fertiliser. The National Fertiliser Database only accounts for the transactions of fertiliser moved on to the holding. It doesn't say, stop, you've reached your limit. And if you go over your limit and there's an inspection, that can lead to penalties. And look, no one wants to be in that scenario. And then you've got correspondence over and back between inspectors and the advisor and the farmer. And, then you're into a penalty situation. And it's the additional stress of that. So if you know, it's like driving a car without a steering wheel. It's all grand until you hit something, And if you have a steering wheel, you can steer around the corners and you can be competent enough in where you're going in relation to what fertiliser you can buy for the year.
That's great, Tim. Thanks very much. Some key advice there for farmers.
Okay, thanks very much, Catherine, for having me on.
Next week, Mark Plunkett, working with the Signpost programme, will go through all the requirements in relation to fertiliser application and the fertiliser register. That's all for this week's episode. You can catch up on all other shows and interviews from the Beef Edge podcast on the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie, or you can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe so you never miss a show. For all other updates from our beef programme, keep an eye on our Twitter and Facebook pages. Until next time, I'm Catherine Egan and thanks for listening.